So if you look at a modern map of Europe today, it feels pretty permanent. You see France, Germany, Italy, and you kind of just assume these entities have always been there.
Right, like the Alps or the Danube or something.
Exactly. But we're looking at some research today for this deep dive that suggests our entire concept of a country is actually a remarkably recent invention.
It is. I mean, it's surprising, but it is.
Yeah. And just to set the stage for you listening, our mission today is to unpack a collection of excerpts from a source titled The Rise and Ruin of European Nationalism.
Which is covering the AP European History Topic 7.2 material.
Right. And the central thesis here is just fascinating. It argues that nationalism didn't start out as a rigid political reality.
Not at all.
It started as a story people told themselves.
A story that, well, eventually became a pretty ruthless weapon.
Yeah, that's the trajectory we're tracing today.
Yeah.
From these sort of romantic fairy tales of the early 1800s straight through to the industrial slaughter of World War I.
It's a dark pivot.
It really is.
Yeah.
But before we get to the wars and the politics, I want to clarify the terms. The readings make a massive distinction between a nation and a state.
Yeah, they do. And I think the best way to conceptualize this for you listening is it's the difference between software and hardware.
Okay, software and hardware. I like that.
Yeah, so the nation is the software. It's the psychological sense of us. It's a group of people who share a common culture, history, language, usually a religion.
It's the vibe.
Exactly. It's the cultural programming.
Whereas the state is the hardware.
Right.
The borders, the tax collectors, the police, the actual government apparatus.
Precisely. And the whole story of the 19th century in Europe is essentially this violent struggle to force those two things to align.
To create the nation state.
Yes. It was about drawing an imaginary line around a specific cultural group and saying, this land belongs to us and we govern ourselves.
And what's so wild to me about the source material is how this imaginary line created a totally new form of human identity.
It was revolutionary.
Because before this, you were just a subject of a king. You lived on his land. If your king married a duchess in Spain, suddenly you belonged to a different realm entirely.
Your identity was strictly transactional.
Right. But nationalism made it existential.
It really shifted the core question from who rules me to who am I?
Who am I?
Right.
So let's go back to that early who am I phase.
Romantic roots.
Yeah, the source material calls this the romantic roots of nationalism. And surprisingly, the original architects of modern Europe weren't generals.
No, they weren't.
They were linguists. They were writers. Which means we have to talk about the Grimm brothers.
Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm.
Yeah.
And most people know them for the fairy tales, obviously. Cinderella, Snow White.
The Disney stuff?
Exactly. But the motivation behind Grimm's fairy tales wasn't just to entertain children at bedtime. It was a highly calculated act of cultural preservation.
Because the context here is just crucial. In the early 1800s, Germany didn't exist.
Right.
It was divided into dozens and dozens of little states. Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony.
A total jigsaw puzzle.
And the dialects were so distinct that a person from the north might barely even understand a person from the south.
So the Grimms realized that if you ever wanted to build a unified German nation politically, you first needed a unified German language.
And a shared mythology.
Exactly. By going around and collecting these specific folk tales, stories of the deep, dark forests, the witches, the wolves.
They were creating a standardized cultural code.
They were proving that the peasant in Bavaria and the shopkeeper in Prussia actually shared the exact same soul.
Which connects directly to the philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte.
Yes. Fichte is huge here.
The readings highlight his concept of the Volksgeist.
The spirit of the people.
Right.
Fichte argued that a nation isn't just a legal agreement or a line drawn on a map by some aristocrats.
He thought it was deeper than that.
Much deeper. He believed it was an organic, living entity. The German people, in his view, possessed this unique, superior spirit that absolutely had to be preserved and purified.
It sounds very poetic on the surface.
It does.
But there's a really sharp edge to it, isn't there? Because it inherently implies that we are fundamentally different from them.
And that differentiation is the entire engine of nationalism. You see it popping up in France, too, just with a slightly different flavor.
Oh, like Victor Hugo.
Look at Victor Hugo and Les Miserables.
Which I think so many people misunderstand today as just a story about grace and redemption.
Right.
Or just a Broadway musical.
Right. But politically, it did some massive heavy lifting.
How so?
Well, Hugo was writing during a time of intense turmoil in France. And by focusing his epic on The wretched, the common people, the students, the street urchins.
Parcelja.
Exactly. By elevating their specific struggle to something heroic, he was essentially creating a secular mythology for the French Republic.
He was giving them a story.
He was telling the French people, this is who we are.
Right.
We are the people who fight tyranny. We are the barricades.
So in that first half of the century, nationalism is this liberal, romantic ideal.
Very much so.
It's all about freedom, self-expression, overthrowing the old out-of-touch monarchs.
Right.
But then the script completely flips.
The conservative pivot.
Yeah, this is where the story gets a lot darker in the text.
By the mid-19th century, the old conservative elites, the kings and the aristocrats, they realized they couldn't just crush nationalism with armies anymore.
It was way too popular.
It was everywhere, so they decided to co-opt it.
They figured if they couldn't beat the mob, they would lead the mob.
Oh, exactly.
And the readings point to two absolute masterminds of this strategy, Napoleon III in France and Otto von Bismarck in Prussia.
Let's look at Napoleon III first, because his strategy is fascinating.
He's the nephew of the famous Napoleon Bonaparte.
Right. He takes power in a coup, but then he does something very, very strange for a dictator.
What's that?
He implements universal male suffrage.
He gives every man the right to vote.
Yes.
Which seems totally contradictory. Usually authoritarians want to restrict voting as much as humanly possible.
It's a brilliant, cynical move, though. He knew that the urban centers, places like Paris and Lyon, they were full of radical liberals and socialists who absolutely hated him.
Like the barricade builders.
Exactly. But France is a huge country, and the vast majority of the population were conservative, Catholic peasants living out in the countryside.
Oh.
So by giving everyone the vote, he mathematically drowned out the radicals in Paris with a massive tidal wave of rural conservative votes.
Wow. So he basically used the voice of the people to secure his own absolute authoritarian power.
Yes, he did. And then he used that power to physically rebuild the city of Paris.
Haussmannization.
Yes. Under Baron Haussmann, they tore down all those medieval, narrow, winding streets.
The ones that were so easy for revolutionaries to block with barricades.
Exactly, and they built those massive, wide, beautiful boulevards we see in Paris today.
So he made the city beautiful, which obviously swells national pride.
Huge boost to nationalism.
But he also secretly made it revolution-proof.
Because you can't block a boulevard that wide with a couple of overturned carts. And more importantly, you can march an entire army right down the middle of it.
That is just brilliantly devious. So Napoleon III used nationalism as a tool of domestic control.
He did. But if he used it for domestic control, Otto von Bismarck in Prussia used it for international dominance.
The Iron Chancellor.
Yes.
This section of the text is incredibly intense. Bismarck has that famous quote where he says, "The great questions of the day wouldn't be settled by speeches and resolutions, but by iron and blood."
Bismarck was the ultimate practitioner of realpolitik.
Meaning politics based on raw power.
Right. Power and practical material factors. Zero explicit ideological notions or moral premises. He wanted to unify Germany under Prussian rule.
But the smaller German states didn't want that.
No, they wouldn't just agree to it. They were highly suspicious of Prussia's power.
So he had to manufacture a reason for them to voluntarily join him.
He needed a common enemy.
And his solution is wild. He essentially bullied his neighbors into declaring war on him.
The manipulation of the Ems dispatch is the classic example here.
Right. He took a standard diplomatic cable between the Prussian king and the French ambassador.
And he edited it.
He heavily edited it to make it look like the Prussian king had deeply insulted the French.
And then he published it in the newspapers.
Just to trick France into declaring war on Prussia in 1870.
It was a trap.
That is such a high-stakes gamble. He provoked a massive war with a major European power just to prove a point to his smaller neighbors.
Well, it worked perfectly. The second France attacked, those southern German states, Bavaria, Baden, they panicked.
The nationalist instinct just kicked right in.
Exactly. They rushed to join the Prussian army to defend the quote-unquote German fatherland from the French invaders.
And Bismarck used that exact war frenzy to officially declare the creation of the German Empire.
And he did it in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles.
That image is so striking, declaring the birth of Germany inside the absolute heart of the French royal palace.
It's the ultimate humiliation.
Which perfectly sets up the bitter animosity that leads straight into World War I.
It really does. But while Bismarck is up north unifying Germany with blood and iron down in Italy, the Sorts points out a slightly different dynamic.
Yeah, the interplay between the dreamer and the diplomat.
Giuseppe Mazzini and Camillo di Cavour. The text contrasts their approaches really well.
Mazzini is very much the romantic soul of Italian unification.
He founded the Young Italy movement. He was an absolute idealist. He wanted a republic. He wanted the people to just spontaneously rise up in the streets.
He provided the emotional fuel.
The vibe of the nation.
Right.
But his uprisings kept failing because passion alone doesn't beat Austrian cannons.
Right. Which is where Cavour enters the picture.
Prime Minister of Piedmont, Sardinia.
And he's much more like Bismarck. He doesn't care about the romance or the poetry. He cares about logistics.
Cavour was a strict pragmatist. He looked at the board and realized Italy couldn't unify itself. It needed heavy military help to kick the Austrians out of the northern territories.
So he starts cutting these backroom deals with France.
He modernizes the army. He plays the complex geopolitical game.
Mazzini dreamed the nation into existence, but Cavour actually built the state that could hold it.
Exactly.
So by 1871, the map of Europe has fundamentally changed. We finally have a unified Germany and a unified Italy.
The nation-state model is definitively winning.
But this creates a massive existential crisis for the countries that aren't nation-states.
The multi-ethnic empires.
Right. Specifically, the Austrian Empire and the Ottoman Empire.
They were basically dinosaurs in the modern age of nationalism.
Because the Austrian Empire contained Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Croats, Serbs.
And as this idea of nationalism spread, every single one of those distinct groups started looking around and saying, hey, where's our country?
The Austrians tried to put a lid on this pressure cooker with the Compromise of 1867.
Creating the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary.
Which I've always found to be just fascinatingly short-sighted on their part.
It was a desperate act of triage by the emperor. The Hungarians, the Magyars, they were the most powerful and the most rebellious minority group within the empire.
So the Austrian emperor essentially says, okay, fine, we'll treat you as equal partners.
You get your own parliament, you get domestic control over your half of the empire.
But by satisfying the Hungarians, didn't they just completely alienate everyone else?
Yeah, that is the fatal flaw of the compromise.
Right.
The Czechs and the Slavic populations looked at this sweet deal the Hungarians got and asked, why them and not us?
It just accelerated the fragmentation.
It did. And this brings us directly to the concept of Pan-Slavism, which the readings highlight as arguably the match that lights the fuse for World War I.
This is the movement arguing that all Slavic peoples across Eastern and Central Europe should be united.
Yes.
And, conveniently, the biggest Slavic power on the board, Russia, decides to appoint itself as the big brother of this entire movement.
Because Russia used Pan-Slavism to project its own imperial power down into the Balkans.
All right, they encouraged the Serbs and other Slavic groups to openly rebel against Austrian and Ottoman rule.
So you have this one region, the Balkans, filled with diverse people desperate for their own nationhood.
Underneath crumbling imperial authority.
With a great power, Russia actively fanning the flames from the outside.
The Balkan powder keg.
Exactly. It was inevitable.
But there's another layer to this ruin that the text explores. As we move toward the turn of the 20th century, the very definition of nationalism shifts again.
It does. It stops being just about shared language and shared culture.
It starts absorbing the pseudoscience of the time.
It becomes biological.
The shift to racialism. Now, I want to pause here for a second because the source material wades into some incredibly intense historical waters here. And just as a reminder to you listening, we're simply unpacking the analysis provided in the text. We aren't taking any political sides, just conveying the history as presented. But this part of the reading felt incredibly chilling because nationalism went from we are German because we speak German to we are German because we are biologically superior.
And you are a contamination.
Exactly.
This is where nationalism goes from being inclusive to aggressively exclusive. To define the U.S. more rigidly, these states decided they needed a them within their own borders.
And tragically, historically, that them became the Jewish population of Europe.
The Dreyfus Affair in France in 1894 is the primary case study the text uses here.
It's almost hard to believe how much societal chaos this single court case caused.
It completely paralyzed the French nation.
Because Alfred Dreyfus was essentially the perfect French citizen on paper.
He was a captain in the army. He was fully assimilated, deeply patriotic.
But he was Jewish.
Yes. And when he was falsely accused of treason, the actual evidence didn't even matter.
The nationalist right-wing press just exploded.
They didn't just attack Dreyfus the individual, they attacked the very presence of Jewish people in French society.
And what's so wild is that this wasn't 1930s Germany. This was France, the birthplace of the Enlightenment, the rights of man.
That was the true shock of it. It proved to many that legal equality simply wasn't enough anymore.
You could be a citizen on paper.
But if the nation was now defining itself racially, you would never truly belong.
And this realization rippled all across Europe. The text mentions Vienna, where you had Karl Lueger.
He was a mayor who won elections specifically by using anti-Semitism as a populist rallying cry to mobilize voters.
Just weaponized hatred for political gain.
Exactly.
And witnessing this exclusion firsthand led to a massive new reaction. The realization that if the nation-states of Europe are going to reject you, you have to build your own.
Which is the political context the text provides for the birth of Zionism.
Theodor Herzl.
Yes. In 1895, he was an assimilated Austro-Hungarian journalist, and he was actually in Paris covering the Dreyfus trial.
He heard the crowds outside the military compound chanting "Death to the Jews."
And he realized right then that the liberal dream of integration was dead.
He realized that assimilation was a failed strategy.
He argued that because anti-Semitism had become a structural feature of this new European nationalism, Jewish people would never be safe until they had a state of their own.
They needed the hardware to protect their software.
Exactly.
And the text points out it's really important to distinguish that in this specific historical context, Zionism emerges not just as a religious longing,
Right.
but as a highly modern nationalist movement, a direct survival mechanism copying the very model that the Italians and the Germans had just used.
Precisely. It was a marginalized minority group looking around and saying, well, if the entire world is organizing itself into nation states, then we need one too.
We need our own borders.
Yes.
So let's pull the lens all the way back here as we wrap up. We start the century in 1815 with this concert of Europe.
Kings working together across borders to keep the peace.
But by 1914, that concert is deafeningly silent.
It is entirely gone. In its place, you have these highly centralized, heavily armed competitive nation states.
Germany and Italy are totally disrupting the old balance of power.
The Ottoman and Austrian empires are collapsing inward into ethnic violence.
And the populations of all these countries have been fed a steady daily diet of national superiority for decades.
They've been taught from birth that their Volksgeist is the best.
That their borders are sacred.
And that war is a completely legitimate, even noble tool to expand those borders.
Nationalism created the cohesion necessary for modern states to even function.
It built the railroads, the public schools, the massive armies.
But it also created this intense zero-sum mentality. The idea that for us to be great, they must be actively diminished.
It turned the entire map of Europe into a minefield.
It really did.
Yeah.
And when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914, he wasn't just killed by a guy with a gun.
No.
He was killed by the violent collision of all these massive tectonic plates we've been discussing today. Pan-Slavism, imperial insecurity, and hyper-militant nationalism.
And the ultimate tragedy of this era is that the imaginary lines they drew so carefully in the 19th century quite literally became the muddy, bloody trenches of the 20th.
That is such a heavy thought. But I think it's a perfect lingering thought for this deep dive. Because, we like to think we've evolved past this era of history.
We certainly hope we have.
But you just look at the news today. Look at the rhetoric being used by leaders around the world. When we see conflicts today, whether that's in Eastern Europe or anywhere else really, you have to ask yourself, how much of it is still just relitigating the exact same boundaries and cultural identities that were established in this specific window of the 19th century?
The players on the board might change, but the script remains remarkably, terrifyingly similar.
It's a lot to mull over. Thanks for diving into all this history with us today.
Always a pleasure to be here.